I never forget that moment, the moment everything shattered. One email, 6 words. Your position has been eliminated. 6 hours later, I'd locked down the entire payment system. By morning, $59 million of the CFO's budget was frozen solid. No warning, no apology, just deafening silence. He thought he could erase me with a keystroke, dismiss 5 years of my work like it meant nothing. But he forgot one crucial detail. I built the system. I held the keys. And now, his empire was about to crumble. One frozen transaction at a time. This is how I brought him to his knees. My name is Madison Hale, and for 5 years, I was the architect of Silverwood Capital's financial nervous system. 34 years old, risk control and liquidity specialist, keeper of secrets that moved $1.2 billion through digital veins every single day. I built Atlas from nothing, a proprietary monitoring platform that tracked every cent, flagged every anomaly, caught every ghost transaction before it could haunt us. I was good at my job. Too good, apparently. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and fear that Tuesday morning. 23 faces around the mahogany table, all trying not to make eye contact. Gavin Locke stood at the head, our new CFO. 3 months into his reign of PowerPoint terrorism, Harvard MBA, Wharton Executive Program, and the emotional intelligence of a spreadsheet. His Italian suit cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore it like armor. Efficiency, he said, clicking to a slide showing a red downward arrow. That's our mandate from the board. We're streamlining operations, eliminating redundancies, creating a leaner, more agile organization. I watched him perform, this man who'd never written a line of code, never traced a wire transfer through 7 shell companies at 3 a.m, never caught a compliance violation that could have cost us our license. He talked about vision while standing blind. 3 weeks earlier, I'd sent him a detailed risk assessment, 17 pages documenting liquidity concerns in our emerging markets portfolio, critical vulnerabilities that needed immediate attention. His response had been a 2-word email, noted, thanks. Now he clicked to the next slide. Names, 14 names in Arial font, clinical and cold. Mine was number 7. These positions are being eliminated effective immediately, Gavin announced. HR will coordinate your transitions. The room erupted in careful professional panic. Questions about severance, about projects in progress, about who would handle critical systems. I sat silent, feeling the weight of what they didn't know yet. Madison, Gavin's voice cut through the noise, and I looked up to find him staring directly at me. I know you have concerns about our risk protocols, but we need people with vision here, not people who see problems everywhere they look. The others turned to watch. This was theater now, and Gavin was establishing dominance. He smiled, that practiced Wall Street predator smile. Fear-based thinking holds us back, he continued. We're moving into a new era of calculated aggressive growth. Those who can't adapt to that reality have no place here. Someone's phone vibrated against the table. The sound echoed like a death rattle. I could have argued, could have explained that what he called fear, the industry called due diligence, could have told him that the system he was so eager to gut was the only thing standing between Silverwood and a federal investigation. But I didn't, because in that moment, watching him preen in his borrowed authority, I realized something beautiful. Gavin Locke had no idea what I'd built into Atlas. No idea what safeguards I'd embedded in the code. No idea that he'd just declared war on the person holding all his ammunition. I understand, I said, my voice steady as a flatline. When do you need my credentials? It will handle the transition. We've already assigned your responsibilities to the offshore team. The offshore team, 3 contractors in Mumbai who thought Jason was a typo. Good luck with that. Sarah from compliance caught my eye, her face pale. She knew, maybe not the details, but she knew enough to be scared. The others were already calculating their survival odds, updating their LinkedIn profiles in their heads. Gavin dismissed us with a wave, already moving on to his next slide about projected Q3 returns. As I stood to leave, gathering my laptop and the coffee I'd never touched, he called out one more time. Madison. No hard feelings. It's just business. I turned back, meeting his eyes. Of course, just business. Walking out of that room, passing the cubicles where my team still worked, oblivious to the earthquake about to hit, I felt oddly calm. Gavin thought he'd won, thought he'd eliminated a problem, silenced a dissenting voice, cleared the path for his grand vision. He had no idea he'd just armed a bomb. By the time I reached my desk, my hands were steady. I had 6 hours before they'd lock me out. 6 hours to prepare the lesson Gavin Locke would never forget. He wanted aggressive growth. He was about to get aggressive consequences. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not code, just documentation, making sure every brilliant, brutal detail of what was about to happen would be perfectly, legally, legitimate. The beauty of Atlas wasn't just what it could do, it was what I'd made sure it couldn't do without me. 5 years ago, when I pitched the system to the previous CFO, I'd insisted on certain security protocols, not out of ego or paranoia, but because I'd seen too many firms burn when their systems got compromised. The board had approved every clause, every safeguard, every carefully worded provision. They'd even congratulated me on my thoroughness. Clause 43C, buried on page 47 of the internal compliance manual that Gavin had definitely never read. The clause that stated any liquidity movement exceeding $5 million required digital signature verification from the system architect. Not just any admin, not the CFO, the architect, me. It wasn't a back door, it was a front door with my name engraved on the handle. I pulled up the documentation from 3 months ago, right before Gavin's arrival. The previous CFO, Patricia Morse, had signed off on my enhanced security update. Smart woman, Patricia. She understood that in our business. Paranoia was just another word for prudence. The update had added layers of authentication, biometric locks, and most importantly, architect-level oversight for major transfers. Gavin had inherited this system. He'd been briefed on it. Supposedly, HR had a signed document saying he'd reviewed all critical infrastructure. But men like Gavin didn't review, they delegated review. Some junior analyst had probably skimmed it and told him everything was fine. Everything was not fine. I opened the Atlas admin panel, my fingers dancing across familiar keys. Every transaction, every wire, every allocation request, they all flowed through here. I could see Gavin's ambitious plans taking shape in real time. $40 million allocated to something called Phoenix Ventures, $19 million more to Orion Growth Fund, all of it waiting for execution, sitting in the queue like planes on a runway. The Orion Fund, I'd flagged that 3 months ago, back when it was just a proposal. Unaudited companies, offshore registrations, beneficial ownership hidden behind 7 layers of shell corporations, the kind of structure that made compliance officers wake up in cold sweats. Gavin had loved it, called it innovative structuring in his presentation to the board. I started documenting everything, screenshots, transaction IDs, timestamp logs. Then I began the real work. First, I updated the authentication matrix. Every transaction over $5 million now required 2-factor architect verification. But here's the elegant part: I set it to trigger only after business hours. During market hours, everything would look normal. After 5 p.m. Eastern, when Gavin liked to push through his big moves without oversight, Atlas would demand my personal authorization. Second, I tagged every entity connected to Gavin's pet projects. Orion, Phoenix, Meridian Capital, all of them. Atlas would now flag these for enhanced scrutiny, the kind that automatically copied compliance and legal on every transaction. Not illegal, not even unusual, just following the protocols for high-risk entities that I'd identified months ago. Third, and this was the masterpiece, I uploaded my intellectual property documentation to Compliance Vault, our legal department's secured repository. Every line of code I'd written, every algorithm I'd designed, every security protocol I'd implemented, all registered under my name with timestamp verification. 5 years of work, officially recorded as my creation. My phone buzzed. IT department. They'd be coming soon to collect my laptop, my keycard, my access. I had maybe an hour left. I composed one last email to Patricia Morse, my old CFO, now retired in Martha's Vineyard. Subject line: confirming security protocols remain active. The body was simple, professional. Just checking that the safeguards we'd implemented were still protecting the firm's assets. I copied legal, just to create a paper trail. Patricia would understand. She'd probably pour herself an extra glass of wine tonight. Grateful she'd gotten out when she did. The IT team arrived at 4:45 p.m., apologetic and awkward. Tom, who I'd helped debug the server arrays last Christmas, couldn't meet my eyes. "Just doing our job. Madison," he mumbled. "I know. Tom, check your documentation on Atlas when you get a chance. Make sure you understand the architect protocols." He frowned, confused, but nodded. They'd figure it out soon enough. As they escorted me out, I passed Gavin's corner office. He was on a call, gesturing wildly at some charts on his screen, probably promising impossible returns to nervous investors. He saw me through the glass, gave a dismissive wave, already forgetting I existed. That was his second mistake. The first was firing me. By the time I reached the lobby, the market had closed. In approximately 15 minutes, Gavin would try to push through his first after-hours transaction. In approximately 16 minutes, he'd discover that Atlas wouldn't let him. I handed my keycard to security, walked through the revolving door into the Manhattan evening, and turned off my phone. Let them figure it out. After all, I didn't work there anymore. Wednesday morning, I sat in my Brooklyn apartment, drinking coffee and watching the financial news. Nothing about Silverwood yet, but I knew the storm was brewing. My laptop, my personal one, showed 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. I'd blocked Silverwood's main line, but they were getting creative. At 9:30 a.m., my former colleague Jake texted me, "Atlas is going insane. What did you do?" I didn't respond. Jake was smart enough to figure it out. The real show started Thursday. Gavin had scheduled his grand reallocation $59 million from the Stable Income Fund into Orion Growth. The kind of move that would make him a hero if it worked, get him a 7-figure bonus and a Wall Street Journal profile. He'd promised the board 300% returns in Q3. Aggressive didn't even begin to cover it. I pulled up the public filing documents for Orion Growth, shell company registered in Delaware, owned by another shell in the Caymans, which traced back to a fund in Cyprus, the kind of structure that screamed either tax evasion or money laundering. But the returns, on paper, looked stellar, too stellar. I'd seen this movie before. It usually ended with federal agents and windbreakers. My phone rang. Sophia Trent, head of legal. I actually answered this one. "Madison, we need to talk about Atlas." "I don't work for Silverwood anymore, Sophia." "But you built Atlas. You understand the security protocols?" "Yes, I documented them extensively. It's all in Compliance Vault. Didn't Gavin review the system before pushing through major reallocations?" Silence. Then, carefully, "Gavin is requesting you release the authentication locks." "I can't do that." "Madison." "No, Sophia. Literally, I can't. Clause 483C specifically states that authentication locks can only be modified by the system architect while under active employment contract with Silverwood. I'm no longer employed. Any attempt by me to access Atlas now would constitute unauthorized system intrusion. That's a federal crime." I could hear her typing, probably pulling up the clause. "Christ," she muttered. "Gavin should have thought about that before eliminating my position. He's threatening to sue you for sabotage." With what evidence I followed every protocol, I secured the system exactly as specified in the documentation he signed off on. The fact that he didn't read it isn't sabotage, it's negligence. More typing, papers rustling. Sophia was good at her job. One of the few competent executives left at Silverwood. "The Orion transfer is time-sensitive," she said finally. "If it doesn't go through by tomorrow, we lose our position. Then you'd better find a solution that doesn't involve me committing a felony." "Madison, be reasonable." I was reasonable when I warned about liquidity risks 3 weeks ago. I was reasonable when I documented Orion's compliance red flags. I was reasonable when I sat quietly while Gavin called me fearful and visionless in front of the entire senior staff. Now I'm unemployed, and reasonableness is no longer in my job description. The board is getting involved. Good. Let them see what their golden boy had done. The board approved the security protocols, I reminded her. Patricia Morse signed them. You countersigned them. They're designed to protect Silverwood from exactly this kind of reckless reallocation. Gavin says the offshore team can handle it. I actually laughed. The offshore team doesn't have architect-level access. They have maintenance privileges only. It would take them 6 months minimum to understand Atlas's architecture, assuming they could even get past the encryption. By then, your Orion opportunity will be long gone. What do you want, Madison? Nothing. I wanted to do my job. That option was removed from the table. If Orion fails because Gavin can't move money, he shouldn't be moving into funds that shouldn't exist. That's not my problem. Check the risk assessment I filed. Page 12, Section 3, I believe I used the phrase catastrophic liquidity event several times. Sophia went quiet. I could picture her pulling up my report, the one Gavin had dismissed with 2 words. This fund, she said slowly, these companies in Orion. Completely unaudited, anonymous beneficial ownership, returns that make Bernie Madoff look conservative. But hey, I'm just someone who sees problems everywhere, right? We need to stop this transfer. Now you're being reasonable, but that's between you and Gavin. I'm going to finish my coffee and maybe take a walk in Prospect Park. It's beautiful outside. You should try unemployment sometime. Sophia, very relaxing. She hung up, within an hour. My phone started exploding again. Calls, texts, emails to my personal account, DevOps, trying to find a workaround, compliance, requesting documentation, even Tom from IT, asking about override codes that didn't exist. But the best message came at 4:53 p.m., right before markets closed. A text from an unknown number that I knew was Gavin. You're finished in this industry. I smiled, screenshotted it for my records, and went back to watching Netflix. He still didn't understand. I wasn't trying to save my career. I was teaching a lesson in consequences, and class was just getting started. Friday morning arrived with thunderstorms, both meteorological and corporate. My former colleague Sarah from compliance called at 8:15 a.m. Madison, you need to know what's happening here. It's absolute chaos. I put her on speaker while I made breakfast. I'm not involved anymore, Sarah. Gavin called an emergency all hands at 7 a.m., DevOps, legal, compliance, operations, everyone. He's screaming about sabotage, threatening to fire the entire IT department. That seems unproductive. Tom tried to explain the architect protocols. Gavin threw a coffee mug at the wall. I cracked eggs into a pan, listening to the sizzle. Hopefully not the good coffee mugs. Those were expensive. This isn't funny, Madison. He's talking about bringing in external consultants to break the system. Now that was interesting. External consultants can't override architect-level security without either my authorization or a complete system rebuild. A rebuild would take months and cost millions. Also, it would trigger an automatic audit. That's what Carl told him. Carl Rodriguez, Director of DevOps, former Marines, MIT graduate, and one of the few people who truly understood what I'd built. We'd worked together on Atlas's core architecture, spending countless late nights debugging code and stress testing security protocols. What did Gavin say to that? He demanded Carl find a workaround. Carl pulled up Clause 4.3c on the conference room screen. Then he pulled up the board approval documents. Then he pulled up Gavin's own signature acknowledging he'd reviewed all system documentation. I smiled, flipping my eggs. Carl always was thorough. Gavin accused him of being in on it, said you'd conspired together. Conspired to follow documented protocols that Gavin himself approved. That's a fascinating legal theory. Sarah lowered her voice. The board is flying in. Emergency meeting scheduled for Monday. The Orion deadline is midnight Sunday. If the transfer doesn't go through, Silverwood loses its position and potentially faces penalties. Penalties. Gavin pre-committed the funds, signed binding agreements. I nearly dropped my spatula. He committed $59 million he didn't have secured. He assumed the transfer was routine, just moving money from one fund to another. Through Atlas, which he never bothered to understand. Madison. Sarah paused. There are rumors about Orion, about why Gavin is so desperate to make this transfer. I turned off the stove. What kind of rumors? Personal investment, off-books guarantees, the kind of thing that ends careers and triggers SEC investigations. The pieces clicked into place. Gavin wasn't just chasing returns, he was covering something. The aggressive timeline, the unaudited funds, the shell company structure. He'd probably made promises he couldn't keep without Silverwood's money. Sarah, document everything. Every email, every message, every thrown coffee mug. Create backups. Store them somewhere Gavin can't reach. Already doing it, Sophia advised the same thing. Smart women. They could see the tsunami coming. My phone buzzed with an email notification from DevOps, sent to all senior staff, CC'd to legal and the board. Subject: Atlas Security Protocol Analysis. Carl had attached a comprehensive report. Every line of code I'd written, every security measure I'd implemented, all mapped out in excruciating detail. At the bottom, his conclusion in bold: system operating as designed, no evidence of tampering or malfunction. All security measures were approved by board resolution dated 18 months ago. Current authentication requirements cannot be bypassed without violating federal cybersecurity regulations. Gavin's response came 3 minutes later, replied all. This is unacceptable. Find another way. Carl's response also replied all, sir, another way would constitute criminal hacking of our own system. I will not authorize or participate in such actions. Then Sophia chimed in, legal concurs with DevOps assessment. Any attempt to bypass established security protocols would expose Silverwood and its executives to significant liability. The chain kept growing. Compliance added their concerns about the Orion Fund itself. Risk management resurrected my 3-week-old assessment. Even HR chimed in, noting that proper transition protocols hadn't been followed when terminating the system architect position. I watched it all unfold on my laptop, eating my eggs and toast. Gavin was fighting a war on 12 fronts, and losing all of them. Every department was now questioning not just the Stuck transfer, but his judgment in attempting it at all. At 11:47 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number with a 212 area code. Miss Hale, this is Jonathan Pierce from the Silverwood Board of Directors. I'd met Pierce once, at a company event, old school Wall Street, the kind who'd survived 3 market crashes and 2 SEC investigations without a scratch. Mr. Pierce, we need you to come in Monday morning. As a consultant, we're prepared to offer significant compensation for your expertise. I'm unemployed. Mr. Pierce, Gavin made that quite clear. Gavin doesn't speak for the board. We'd like to understand the situation with Atlas. The situation is simple. Atlas is working perfectly, exactly as designed and documented. The problem isn't the system, it's that your CFO tried to push through a questionable transaction without understanding the controls in place. Silence. Then how questionable? Ask Sophia for my risk assessment. Page 12 through 15 covers Orion specifically. Words like potential fraud and regulatory nightmare feature prominently. We'll review it. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'll consider it, but Mr. Pierce, you should know that even as a consultant, I can't override the security protocols. That would require reinstating me as system architect with full signing authority. He chuckled, dry as dust. We'll see what Monday brings. Miss Hale. The weekend passed in eerie silence. No calls, no texts, no desperate emails. Either Gavin had given up, or he was planning something, given his Harvard MBA and complete inability to admit defeat. I assumed the latter. Sunday night, 11:43 p.m., 17 minutes before the Orion deadline. My phone lit up with alerts from my monitoring app, the one I'd built to track Atlas remotely. Perfectly legal since it only showed system status, not actual data. Someone was attempting to access the architect-level protocols. Multiple failed authentication attempts. They were trying to brute force it. Idiots. Atlas had a simple rule for brute force attempts: 3 strikes, and it locked down for 24 hours. They hit strike 3 at 11:51 p.m. The Orion deadline passed. $59 million, frozen in digital limbo. Monday morning, I arrived at Silverwood at 8:45 a.m. The security guard looked surprised, but had my visitor badge ready. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to a tribunal. The boardroom was packed. Jonathan Pierce sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other board members I recognized from annual reports. Gavin sat to his left, looking haggard. Sophia Trent was there with 2 other lawyers. Carl from DevOps, the head of risk management. Even Patricia Morse had dialed in via video from Martha's Vineyard. "Miss Hale," Pierce began, "thank you for coming." I took the only empty seat, directly across from Gavin. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Let's start with facts," Pierce continued. "As of midnight last night, Silverwood Capital failed to meet its obligations for a $59 million transfer to the Orion Growth Fund. This failure has triggered penalty clauses totaling $8 million and potential litigation from our partners." He slid a document across the table. "This is your risk assessment from 3 weeks ago, the one Mr. Locke dismissed." "Noted. Thanks," Gavin muttered, his favorite phrase coming back to haunt him. "According to this assessment," Pierce continued, "Orion Growth Fund exhibits multiple indicators of fraudulent structure. Miss Hale, can you elaborate?" I opened my copy of the report. Page 14, Section 2. Orion's reported returns show statistical impossibilities. No fund maintains 40% monthly returns for 8 consecutive months without a single down day. It's mathematically equivalent to flipping heads 1,000,000 times in a row. "Markets can be irrational," Gavin started. "This isn't about market irrationality," I cut him off. "This is about fake trades. Orion shows transactions time-stamped during market closures. Tokyo trades on Japanese holidays. London trades during the Queen's funeral when markets were shut. Either they have a time machine or they're fabricating records." One of the board members, a woman named Catherine Walsh, leaned forward. "And our CFO wanted to put $59 million into this." "He didn't just want to," Sophia interjected. "He signed binding commitments, without board approval, without risk assessment sign-off, without verifying transfer capability." "I had transfer capability," Gavin snapped, "until someone sabotaged." "No one sabotaged anything," Carl interrupted, pulling up his laptop. "I've spent 72 hours analyzing Atlas. Every security measure is functioning as designed, as documented, as approved by this board 18 months ago." He connected to the main screen. Lines of code appeared. "This is Clause 4.3c implementation. See this function here? Architect-level authentication for transfers over $5 million. Written by Madison Hale. Approved by Patricia Morse. Signed off by legal." He clicked to another screen. "And here's Mr. Locke's onboarding document, acknowledging he'd reviewed all system documentation." "I didn't think," Gavin began. "Exactly," Pierce said quietly. "You didn't think, you didn't read, you didn't listen. And now Silverwood faces $8 million in penalties, potential SEC investigation, and catastrophic reputation damage." Patricia Morse's voice came through the speaker. "Madison warned us about liquidity risks. She documented concerns about Orion. She built safeguards to prevent exactly this scenario. And Gavin's response was to fire her and call her fearful." "The board needs to understand," Sophia added, opening her own laptop, "that attempting to override Atlas's security now would constitute wire fraud. We'd be breaking our own controls to force through a transfer to what appears to be a fraudulent fund. Every person in this room could face criminal charges." The room went silent. The weight of it pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Pierce looked at Gavin. "Mr. Locke, Did you perform due diligence on Orion Growth Fund? The returns spoke for themselves. Did you read Madison Hale's risk assessment? I skimmed it. Did you understand the Atlas system before attempting to move $59 million through it? Silence. Did you have personal investments in Orion, Mr. Locke? Gavin's face went white. I don't see how that's relevant. It's relevant, Pierce said slowly, because using Silverwood's funds to cover personal positions is embezzlement. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I pulled out my phone, found Gavin's text from Thursday, "You're finished in this industry," and slid it across the table to Pierce. For the record, I said, I'd also like to submit this threat from Mr. Locke, sent after I refused to illegally access Atlas to enable his potentially fraudulent transfer. Pierce read it, passed it to the other board members, then to legal. Mr. Locke, Pierce said finally, you're suspended immediately pending investigation. Security will escort you out. Monday, 7:30 a.m., before the board meeting that would end Gavin's career. I sent one email, a single message to the distribution list that included the board of directors, legal, compliance, and audit. The subject line was clinical, architect authorization status, Atlas system. The body was barely 3 paragraphs. As per Clause 4.3c of the Silverwood Capital Security Protocol, I confirm that I have not authorized the release of funds for any transactions related to the Orion Growth Fund. The security measures currently preventing these transfers are functioning as designed and documented. Any attempt to override these measures without proper architect authorization would violate both internal governance protocols and federal regulations under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Individual executives who authorize such overrides may face personal liability. I remain available as an independent consultant to discuss the technical specifications of Atlas, though I cannot and will not provide system access while no longer employed as system architect. I signed it simply Madison Hale, former system architect, designer of Atlas infrastructure. Then I waited. The explosion was immediate. My phone lit up like a switchboard, but I was watching something more interesting on my laptop, the public SEC filing system. At 7:45 a.m., a whistleblower complaint was filed against Orion Growth Fund. The complainant was anonymous, but the details were devastating. Fabricated returns, non-existent trades, money flowing in but never out. A classic Ponzi structure dressed in modern terminology. I hadn't filed the complaint, but I had a good idea who did. Sophia Trent had been busy over the weekend. By the time I walked into that boardroom at 8:45, the entire financial ecosystem around Gavin was collapsing. The Wall Street Journal had picked up the Orion story. Hedge fund under SEC scrutiny for impossible returns ran across their morning alert. During the meeting, while Gavin tried to defend himself, I watched him check his phone repeatedly. Each glance made him paler. His personal investments in Orion weren't just compromised, they were worthless. Whatever side deal he'd made, whatever promises he'd given or received, they were evaporating in real time. But the true masterstroke came at 9:23 a.m., when Catherine Walsh asked a question that hadn't been scripted. Mr. Locke, can you explain why Atlas shows attempted access from your credentials at 11:43 p.m. last night? Gavin froze. We were trying to resolve the situation. Carl pulled up the logs. These weren't normal access attempts. Someone tried to inject SQL commands to bypass authentication. That's not resolving, that's hacking. We hired consultants. You hired hackers, Carl corrected, to break into our own system. Do you understand what you've done? Every financial institution in the world will see these logs. You've just advertised that Silverwood's CFO tried to criminally compromise his own company's security. Pierce stood up slowly, his face carved from stone. Mr. Locke, you're not just suspended, you're terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security is already at your office. Your accounts are frozen pending investigation, and I strongly suggest you contact a criminal defense attorney. Gavin stood up, shaking. You can't. This is Madison's fault. She set this trap. Miss Hale, Pierce interrupted, turning to me. Did you at any point violate company policy? No. Did you follow all documented procedures? Yes. Did you warn management about the risks involved with Orion? Multiple times, in writing. Then the only trap here, Mr. Locke, is the one you built yourself. 2 security guards appeared at the door, ex-NYPD, both of them. They didn't touch Gavin, just stood there like monuments to consequences. As Gavin gathered his things, his phone, his Mont Blanc pen, his delusions of grandeur, he looked at me one last time. How did you know? Know what? That I'd try to force it through, that I'd commit the funds before securing them, that I'd panic and try to hack the system. I stood up, meeting his eyes for the first time since he'd fired me. I didn't know. Gavin, I just built a system that assumes everyone might be a thief. You proved me right. He left then, flanked by security, his Italian shoes clicking against marble for the last time. The room stayed silent until the elevator doors closed. Pierce cleared his throat. Miss Hale, the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Risk Officer, with a 40% salary increase and full reinstatement of your architect privileges. I looked around the room, at Sophia, who'd protected the company when it mattered, at Carl, who'd stood his ground against a raging executive, at Patricia on the screen, smiling from her vineyard. I'll need some conditions, I said, such as complete autonomy over risk assessment, direct reporting to the board, not the CFO, and the authority to freeze any transaction that fails compliance checks. Done. And I wanted in writing that no executive can override Atlas security protocols without board majority vote. Pierce actually smiled. After this week, you could ask for Gavin's office furniture and we'd probably give it to you. I don't want his furniture. I want a guarantee that the next Gavin can't happen. You'll have it. We shook hands. The board members filed out, already on their phones with damage control teams. PR would spin this as Silverwood's robust systems preventing fraud. Legal would emphasize how our controls worked exactly as designed. The story would become about institutional strength, not individual failure. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about systems or institutions. This was about arrogance meeting architecture. Gavin thought he could bulldoze through anything with enough bluster and a Harvard degree. He forgot that in the digital age, code doesn't care about your credentials. The boardroom transformed into a war room within minutes of Gavin's departure. Pierce commanded the space like a general surveying a battlefield, while lawyers huddled over laptops and phones buzzed with increasing urgency. We need a complete audit trail, Pierce announced. Every transaction Gavin authorized, every document he signed, every email he sent, Madison, can Atlas generate that report? I was already pulling up my laptop. Give me 10 minutes. My fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing Atlas with my newly reinstated credentials. The system recognized me immediately, like greeting an old friend. Every transaction Gavin had touched lit up on my screen a constellation of financial hubris. Jesus Christ, Carl muttered, looking over my shoulder. He moved another $30 million last week. Different fund, same structure as Orion. Meridian Capital, I confirmed, pulling up the details. Shell company registered in Belize. Beneficial ownership traces back to... I stopped, staring at the screen. What? Sophia demanded. It traces back to Gavin's brother-in-law, Thomas Brennan. He's listed as managing director. The room erupted. Pierce slammed his hand on the table. He was funneling company money to his family. Not just funneling, I corrected, diving deeper into the data. Look at the timing. Every transfer to Meridian happened 2 days before a transfer from Meridian to Orion. He was layering transactions, trying to obscure the connection. Catherine Walsh, who'd been silent since Gavin left, spoke up. This isn't just embezzlement. This is money laundering. We need the FBI, Sophia said, already reaching for her phone. Wait, I said, something nagging at me. I pulled up Gavin's access logs from the past month. Look at this. Every major transfer happened between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., after market close, before the next day's audit sweep. So he was hiding them in the overnight gap, Carl said. No, that's not it. I cross-referenced the timestamps with building security logs. Gavin's keycard shows him leaving the building by 7 p.m. every night. Someone else was executing these transfers. Pierce leaned forward. Who else had access? I pulled up the authorization matrix. Only 3 people had the clearance level needed Gavin. Patricia Morse, who was retired, and David Kim, I said quietly. Senior Vice President of Operations, Gavin's golf buddy, the one who recommended him for the CFO position. The implications hung heavy. This wasn't just one rogue executive, it was a conspiracy. Madison, Pierce said, his voice deadly calm. Can you lock down everything, every account, every fund, every cent that Gavin or Kim touched? Already done. I froze everything the moment I regained access. But Pierce, there's something else you need to see. I projected Atlas's main dashboard onto the conference room screen. Red flags everywhere. Not just Orion and Meridian, but 17 other funds, all with the same suspicious patterns, all authorized by Gavin, all executed by Kim during overnight sessions. Combined exposure, Pierce asked. $237 million. Someone dropped a coffee mug. It shattered against the marble floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. How did we not see this? Catherine whispered. Because Gavin dismantled the oversight, I explained. First, he fired me, the person who built the detection systems. Then he marginalized Sophia's legal reviews. He brought in Kim to handle operational efficiency, which meant bypassing normal channels. He created a perfect blind spot. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your personal email. DK. David Kim. I opened my personal email on my phone, keeping it off the main screen. One message, sent 30 seconds ago. Madison, I know what this looks like. Gavin forced me into this. I have recordings of every conversation, every threat. Meet me at the Starbucks on Broadway. 1 hour. I'll give you everything you need to bury him. Come alone, or I run. I showed the message to Pierce and Sophia quietly, not wanting to alert the full room. It's a trap, Sophia said immediately. Or it's a conspirator trying to flip, Pierce countered. Madison. I thought about David Kim, quiet, competent, always in Gavin's shadow, the kind of man who'd follow a stronger personality off a cliff, then realize too late he couldn't fly. I'll go, I said. But not alone. Have security stationed outside. If Kim's serious about flipping, we need what he has. If he's not, we need him in custody. Pierce nodded. Sophia, go with her. Take the FBI liaison. Madison, keep Atlas locked down. Nothing moves without your authorization. I stood to leave, then turned back. Pierce, there's one more thing. The Sunday night hack attempt, the one at 11:43 p.m., it originated from inside the building, from the 40th floor. But the 40th floor was empty Sunday night, Carl said. According to the security logs, yes, but Atlas shows network activity from the CFO's office. Someone was here, using Gavin's terminal, staying off the security grid. Kim, Pierce concluded. Or someone else we haven't identified yet. This might be bigger than just 2 executives. I left them to process that possibility and headed for the elevator with Sophia. As the doors closed, she turned to me. You knew, didn't you? When Gavin fired you, you knew something like this would happen. I knew Gavin was arrogant and reckless. I knew he didn't understand the systems he was supposed to manage. But this level of corruption, no, I didn't see that coming. But you prepared for it anyway. The elevator descended smoothly, each floor counting down to street level, to whatever truth David Kim was selling. I prepared for everything. Sophia, that's what risk management really means, not preventing disasters, but surviving them. The Starbucks meeting never happened. David Kim never showed because by the time Sophia and I arrived, he was already in FBI custody, pulled over on the FDR drive with a laptop full of evidence and a ticket to Costa Rica in his pocket. But his email hadn't been a lie. The FBI found the recordings on his laptop, hours of Gavin threatening, bribing, manipulating, The conspiracy went deeper than anyone imagined, but not wider. It was just two men, drunk on greed, convinced they were smarter than everyone else in the room. Tuesday morning, the story broke properly. Silverwood CFO arrested in 237M fraud scheme dominated the financial news. Gavin's photo, a corporate headshot from Happier Times, appeared next to headlines about embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. The Orion Growth Fund collapsed entirely, taking several smaller investors with it. The SEC announced a full investigation. I stood in my new office, not Gavin's old corner suite. I didn't want that tainted space watching the news coverage on my laptop. My phone had been ringing all morning. Headhunters, reporters, other firms wanting to know how Atlas had caught what human oversight missed. But I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I was reading an email from Patricia Morse, sent from her Martha's Vineyard retirement. Madison saw the news, not surprised. You built Atlas to assume everyone might be a thief, including the architects themselves. That's why it worked. That's why it caught Gavin. The system has no ego, no ambition, no fear. It just follows the rules. Thank you for protecting what we built, even after they tried to destroy you, especially after Patricia. Pierce knocked on my doorframe. The board met this morning. Unanimous decision: you have complete autonomy over risk management. Also, they're implementing mandatory system training for all C-suite executives. No one gets signing authority without understanding what they're signing. About time. There's one more thing. He handed me a folder. Gavin's personal assets have been frozen, but his corporate settlement from when he was hired, the signing bonus, the guaranteed first-year bonus, it's being clawed back. Legal says you have grounds for a civil suit, wrongful termination, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I set the folder aside without opening it. I don't want his money. Madison, he tried to destroy your career. And failed, spectacularly, publicly. His name is toxic now. No firm will touch him, even if he avoids prison. He'll never work in finance again. That's worth more than any settlement. Pierce studied me for a moment. You planned this, all of it. I planned for this possibility. There's a difference. Is there? I turned back to my laptop, pulling up Atlas's dashboard. All green lights, every transaction flowing smoothly, every risk flag properly monitored, every dollar accounted for. Gavin thought power meant being able to break the rules, I said. But real power is building rules that can't be broken, not by anyone, not even by me. Pierce left, and I settled into my new role. The markets were opening, trades were executing, money was flowing through Atlas like blood through veins, and I was watching it all, not with fear, as Gavin had accused, but with respect for what unchecked greed could do. My phone buzzed. A text from Carl. CNN wants to interview you about the Silverwood scandal. I deleted it, then another from Sophia. Wall Street Journal calling you the architect who saved Silverwood. Deleted that too. The truth was simpler and colder than any headline. I hadn't saved Silverwood. I'd just built a system that assumed everyone, including me, including the CEO, including the board, might someday try to steal. Trust, but verify. Or better yet, don't trust at all. Let the code decide. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gavin had called me fearful, visionless, someone who saw problems everywhere. He was right about the last part. I did see problems everywhere. That's why I was still here. And he was facing 20 years in federal prison. The morning sun climbed higher over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the towers of glass and steel. Somewhere in this city, Gavin was sitting in a federal holding cell, probably still wondering how it all went wrong. David Kim was negotiating a plea deal. The Orion investors were calling their lawyers. And I was exactly where I'd always been, watching the numbers, guarding the gates, assuming everyone was guilty until the system proved them innocent. Gavin had given me 6 words. Your position has been eliminated. I'd given him 6 back. Next time, read the fucking documentation. The difference was, My 6 words were carved into the architecture of Atlas itself, encoded in functions and parameters that would outlast both of us. Long after Gavin's name was forgotten, Atlas would still be running, still watching, still protecting Silverwood from the next executive who thought he was above the code. I opened a new terminal window and started typing. There were improvements to make, new safeguards to build, because somewhere out there was another Gavin, another opportunist who thought charm and credentials were enough. They were about to learn otherwise. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate revenge, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And please, share your thoughts. What would you have done in Madison's position? Your comments and discussions make this community amazing.